So, you've been banking Wampa, getting W's, and now you're ready to push your game even further for Crash Team Rumble. Well, here's an advanced guide on how to fine-tune your game. Now, I've already posted a bunch of content from an Ultimate Beginner's Guide to 5 more tips to win games. If you haven't seen those videos yet, I highly suggest that you check them out, because a lot of the information that I'm talking about in this video is founded on the information that we talked about in the previous videos. Now, this guide is a little bit more advanced, so bear with me. You might have to pause this video a couple times, rewind it to rehear some things. Just try your best to be able to keep up. But let's get to the advanced tips for Crash Team Rumble. First off, you need to understand that there are different phases in this game, along with rotations within those phases. And you need to know where you have to be positioning wise in each phase, because if you're wandering the map aimlessly, you're going to start to see more and more losses as more people start to get more focused and better at the game. These phases can basically be split up into 3 different spots. Number 1, lockdown. Number 2, cash in or deny. And 3, collect and fight. These phases repeat multiple times in basically every single match, and they are bookmarked and signaled around the gem pad spawns and bonuses. So let's step through this process. Phase 1, lockdown. Right when the match begins, or right when this phase begins, the first thing you need to do is lock down your gem pad stations. As you step on each one and you light them up with your team, assess if anyone is coming to interrupt your gem pad conversions. If not, shift to the neutral pad position or the enemy pad position if there's only 2. One scorer should venture off and start collecting Wampa fruit almost immediately. The rest of your team is now going to want to fight as much as possible to lock down the neutral gem zone or the enemy gem zone. At this point, your first set of gem pads should be locked down, giving your team an initial Wampa turn-in boost. You want to continue to push to get those neutral zone gem pads as much as physically possible. Now, if your initial boost gets about halfway through its timer and the neutral zone has not been locked down yet, assess if your team is close to locking it down or if they're about to lock it down. If you haven't made any significant progress in locking down at this point, it's time to disengage and go and collect Wampa. Whenever the neutral pad gets locked down is when we shift to phase 2. Phase 2, cash in or deny. Now, if your team won the neutral gem pad positioning, this means you should not have 1 but 2 boosts, and the timer of the first boost has been refreshed and reset. This means that everyone on your team should hyper-focus on strictly collecting Wampa and turning it in during this double bonus turn-in time. Yes, I mean everyone. That includes you, Dingo Dial. Now, if you did not win the neutral zone, then you're going to want to send 1 or 2 people over to the enemy bank to try and stop their big turn-in bonuses. Do everything that you can to make it so that the enemy team can't turn in as much during their double bonus time. When this boost is over is when we shift to the 3rd phase. Phase 3, collect and fight. Once the bonus is over, you now have to assess what to do. Are you winning, losing, or is it pretty close? What you do is all dependent on your role. If you're a scorer, you should be grabbing as much Wampa as possible and turning it in without wasting capacity or time to maximize your turn in. Basically, you want to venture off and collect Wampa, but when you get about halfway through, start to venture back to your own bank while still collecting Wampa. If you do this right, you will hit your max capacity for Wampa fruit as soon as you arrive to your bank. This will give the most points for the least amount of time. Now, as a booster, you should be collecting relics as much as possible and turning them into the epic relic stations. You also should be hunting for the double relic bonuses, as those are incredibly important not only for yourself, but to stop the enemy team from grabbing. While doing that, you also should be turning in Wumpa Fruit in between relic spawns. Again, try not to hold on to max capacity Wumpa for too long. However, this rule is a little bit more loosey-goosey for boosters as their focus is on relics. And finally, as a blocker, if your team is winning by a good margin, hang back at your own bank to defend and help your scorers and boosters turn in. If your team is losing, you should be harassing the enemy team at their own bank, making life extremely difficult for them. As a blocker, you should keep an eye on the epic relic station as well. If both teams are turning in relics and it gets neck and neck, you should help by stopping the enemy team turning in their own relics and turn in your relics, while also using powers and your sheer presence to make sure that your boosters can get the epic relic station activated. Then, when you see the gem pads start to respawn, you will see this indicator on your screen letting you know that they are about to come back online. Once they go back to online, we go back to phase 1 again. Lockdown and rinse and repeat phases 2 and 3 as well. Now, there is a 4th phase, but it's not repeatable. I call it the Endgame. Endgame is when at least one team needs about 200 or 300 more points to win. When this happens, some priorities completely change. If you're on the winning side, scorers should continue focusing on banking their Wumpa. Boosters should also prioritize Wumpa and focus on cashing in their relics, but closer to their banks and defensively. So making sure that you lock down relic stations around your own bank so that 1, the enemy team can't use it against you, and 2, help your teammates with dealing with an invading enemy team. The only reason that you would be turning in your relics at an epic relic station right now would be if you were like maybe 10 or less away from getting the epic relic station. Blockers should focus on defending their own bank and helping their own team lock down the win. However, if you are on the losing side, depending on how severely you're losing, everyone should be at the enemy bank. If you're a blocker, you're dropping your powers at the bank, you're throwing people off, and if you die, you respawn and you're beelining right back to the enemy bank. If you're a booster, you should be turning in as much as possible on the enemy relic stations to help you continually stop the enemy team from banking and stop the enemies from activating it to help them turn in as well. If you're a scorer, you should be on the enemy side, but not putting yourself in super dangerous spots. You should be stealing the boxes closest to the enemy bank, stopping the enemies from grabbing nearby boxes and turning in, while when you get a chance going back and turning in yourself. If you encounter an enemy while collecting, especially if they have a bunch of Wumpa Fruit on hand and they're headed to their bank, you are going to want to fight them and pound them into the dust as much as physically possible. Don't die for it, but knock them around to either eliminate them or make their Wumpa turn in a lot less significant and slow them down. Remember, as a scorer, even at the end game and you're losing, you still have to be turning in Wumpa Fruit while your team is keeping the enemies at bay. So this can actually get very intense. And if you're neck and neck and it's too close to call, the scorers need to continue focusing on turning in Wumpa. The blocker needs to be at the enemy bank, and boosters will be the deciding factor if the game is won or not. The booster has to figure out whether to help out the blocker deny the enemy team of Wumpa, help the scorers turn in by stopping the enemy blocker, and which relic stations to activate. This puts a lot of pressure on boosters to figure out which way to help, so remember that. Also, the value of gem pads can get very tricky here, as big turn-ins are not really needed, especially if you're only 100 points away from winning. My suggestion is that if you're losing by a significant margin, then the booster and or scorer could consider grabbing the gem pads during endgame. However, the blocker needs to keep their butt basically parked at the enemy bank. And that's really it in terms of the phases of the game. Phase 1, lock down the gem pads. Phase 2, cash in or deny. And Phase 3, collect and fight, rinse and repeat until you get to Phase 4, which is the end game, which becomes an epic race to the finish. Now that we got that out of the way, here are some advanced tips for when you're playing. The first tip is that you can take damage while turning in Wumpa or relics. What physically stops Wumpa and relic turn-ins is when the hero's feet are no longer touching the relic station or the bank. Some attacks don't knock players off of their feet, like Tana's spin kicks, but other attacks do, like Dingodile's basic tailspin. You can use this to your advantage to try and dodge attacks when enemies are trying to stop you from turning in, like using Crash's slide to reposition yourself instead of jumping around, because if you jump, you reset the turn-in timer for both the relic station and the bank. When locking down gem pads, try to get them all lit up as quick as possible at the same time, because all the gem pads are lit up on your team side. If an enemy tries to land on a gem pad, it will not instantly turn red. It gives you a short window of time to get them off the gem pad before it turns red and resets your total timer. Gem pads work like banks. They have to be physically touching the pad. To stop them, you have to physically remove them off of the gem pad. Now, if you have all the gem pads locked down and an enemy is coming, try to predict which gem pad they are going to land on, because if you're already standing on the gem pad that they land on, it won't even change color, or that window of opportunity won't even happen because you are already standing on it. Another tip is that if your power is considered as alive, it will lock and hold gem pads for you. So powers like the Fly Spitter Trap and Greg the Gasmoxian Guard will lock and hold down gem pads for you. That also means that if an enemy lands on a gem pad that has, let's say, an ally Fly Trap Spitter on it, it will not change color because the power is considered as alive and it's considered as a player. However, you can also use this technique the other way as well. If you're trying to stop the enemy team from taking a set of gem pads, you can summon a power like Greg, the Gasmoxian Guard, and he will take over the gem pad that he's summoned on. If there's no enemy there though, remember, other powers, like the Fridge, will not lock down the gem pad for you, as the Fridge is not considered as alive. The next tip is staggering the gem pads. Once in a while, you get lucky and you get not only your gem pad set, but the neutral and the enemy gem pad sets. And each gem pad bonus stacks on top of each other and resets the timer to continue the giant bonus. But there is a way to do this more consistently and have complete gem pad control more consistently. When a set of gem pads get locked down, they have their own individual timer before they unlock. That timer begins right when they are all locked down. So after locking in your own gem pads, if the enemy gem pads are not fully locked in yet, or they're about to be locked in, if you stop the enemy gem pad lockdown, even for a moment, and reset their timer and then immediately escape, you now have staggered the gem pads, which means that the gem pads will not come online at the same time anymore because you reset the timer on the enemy gem pads. Now you know your gem pads will unlock first. And remember, there is an indicator that will pop up on each set of gem pads that lets you know when they're about to come online. Now you know that your gem pads will actually unlock first because they were the first to be locked down. When you see that the indicator that your gem pads are about to unlock and come up online again, run to them as fast as you can, and right when they unlock, activate activate them. You then immediately can make your way to the neutral or enemy gem pad set. They should come online right after when you get there, allowing you and your team to steal the enemy's bonus to get a massive turn-in. Relic stations are both ally and enemy sides of the map, but just because there are some relics on the enemy side, it doesn't mean that only the enemies can activate them. Boosters and anybody can activate relic stations on the enemy side to harass the enemy team in their own zone, as well as deny them from using the relic stations themselves to help them cash in or defend. And that's really it for my advanced guide to Crash Team Rumble. If you watch this video along with the other videos, you should start locking in W's and becoming the best performer of the game in no time. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video and or live stream. And don't forget to subscribe for all of your Crash Team Rumble needs. Bye bye!